got through what? Well, part of it. All right, which one was that? So we got through. So we got through. There we go. All right. So we finished seals 1 through 4. And we know, as we look at this, we realize that this is not something that's happening far, far, far in the future. This is something that's going to happen shortly, right? Okay? So we got the idea that we understand that when he talks about these seals that are going to be opened, these are things that must shortly come to pass. Now, of course, we think when it says shortly come to pass, we might be thinking the next couple of days. But the Lord shortly coming to pass may be 30, 40, 50, 60, even to 70, 80, and 100 years. But to the Lord, that's a short time. But we do know that there were going to be some people who were alive then that were going to see these changes come to pass. So we're looking at these, and we determined that the seals that were being opened, we're talking about what? The history of the what? The Roman Empire. Okay? So we saw where that first seal, and I'm not going to go back through all of these. The first seal has to do with this portion of the history of the Roman Empire. Then the second portion was the second seal was yet another portion. And all of this was leading up to some great event. And we're going to see this. We're going to get through, I believe, the 6. We're going to get through 6 because I wanted to stop at this end of this chapter. But there's a lot of stuff we need to get into. So we've gotten up through the 4th seal. And the 4th seal, what happens in the 4th seal? What was the occurrence? What was happening in the 4th seal? And behold, well, no, what happened what does the Scripture say? That's what essentially is happening, but what does the Scripture say specifically? It says on the 4th seal what? Okay. All right, and it says, do not harm the oil and wine, right? Okay, so at this point, we're seeing where there's this devastation in the Roman Empire. And things were going to happen where there were still going to be, it's not that there was a famine, but in order for people to be able to provide for themselves, it was going to be very difficult. Things were going to be more expensive. The idea of oil and wine, two of the biggest commodities in the ancient world was oil and wine. I mean, we cannot overestimate and exaggerate the amount of importance that these things were. Remember the wheat, a quart of wheat for a denarius, 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. So you think about the idea of spending an entire day's wage on a small little thing of wheat, and that's what you've got. So things were going to get more expensive, they were going to get harder and harder to find, and we think about this and the idea of a place that's devastated by war and internal strife. One of the first things to go is agriculture, right? I mean, it's hard to bring in the harvest when these gentlemen, all these farmers who were also soldiers, were out doing all of these things. Part of the strategy was to burn down the crops of the person that you were against, so that they couldn't feed themselves. We learned that from Sherman's March to the Sea. Okay, so these are things that are commonplace. They've been used for centuries, and they'll be used probably in centuries from now. But the idea that, where once there was plenty, now we could still get it, but it's going to be a lot more expensive. It's going to be more difficult to provide for ourselves. Okay, so we got through the fourth seal. So now we got to the 5th seal. Let's look at what the 5th seal has to say. Let me pull it up. All right, in verse 9. When he opened the 5th seal, and the Lamb is still opening, the only one who has authority to open these seals, when he opened the 5th seal, and then another portion of that scroll has been rolled out for John to understand and to look upon, to ponder, to be explained, so forth and so on. He says, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. Now, there's not really much in the way of imagination about what this is, right? Okay, so, they cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. All right, so let's look at this. There's a great deal that we can glean from this. First thing we need to do is we need to remember that when John sees these things in heaven, we cannot confuse them with the things that they represent. All right? So when John saw these souls that were underneath the altar, they weren't actually souls that were under an altar in heaven. That's where he was, and he saw this imagery in heaven. Remember, because that was where Jesus was and that's where God was. That's where the 24 elders were. They were all in this, around the throne, in the throne room of heaven. So as John's seeing these things, he sees these things, he's simply been given to see these things there, not that they actually were there. Okay, so we need to remember that. A lot of people have a problem with this because they want to take that and they twist that idea and they warp that idea to fit in with this end time scenario that everybody seems to have a weird view of. Remember what's the term for the study of end times? Anybody remember? Bonus to anybody can remember. No. Eschatology. Eschatology is simply the study of the end times. What's going to happen? And eschatology has been warped and twisted, has it not? I mean, anybody here who has not talked to somebody who has a warped view about how the world's going to end? Everybody here has. Everybody here has. So what people do is they see this, for one thing, they confuse John's visions, these things that he's been receiving, as something that's going to happen far into the future. You know, the earthquakes and the sun being blotted out and the moon being like blood and the stars falling to the earth. And this is the war between God and his angels and the devil and his angels. And we're going to read about all of these things and we're going to find out really that that's not what these are. But these people are taking this and they're placing this far in the future, hundreds of years in the future. Or maybe it's tomorrow. Maybe it's 1,000 years from now. Maybe it was yet, that people have twisted this. But we see that that's not the case. These are things that must shortly come to pass after John received these visions. All right? So let's think about this for just a second. This eschatology of the end times. We are in the end times, right? That's what the Bible tells us, right? We are in the end times. This is it. Now when the Lord is going to send his Son, that's a different story. We don't know. But we got to make sure that when we talk to people who believe that this is an account of the second coming of Jesus Christ, this is not the case. All right? These are simply things that are going to happen possibly even in the lifetime of people who are sitting there listening to these things being read to them in the assembly. All right? So, just so we know that John is simply seeing a vision of these things in heaven, not that these things are actually physically happening and are in heaven. So when he sees these things, just remember that. He did not see these saints in the body, but he saw their souls because, why did he see their souls? Well, they were already what? The saints were already dead. So he saw the souls of those. And what had happened to these saints whose souls, I'm alliteration here, what happened to these saints whose souls he saw? What did he see? What had happened to these people? They'd been what? Martyred. They'd been martyred. I mean, it even says that in the Scriptures. These were people who had been crucified. I say crucified, put to death. That's a broad term. These are people who had been crucified for Christ. Their bodies had been required of them. Their blood had been required of them because of their belief and their refusal to bend the knee. They were faithful unto death, and we'll see an example of that here in just a couple of seconds as we continue on. All right? So now he saw them under the altar. Now this is an interesting turn of phrase. He saw them under the altar. He saw the blood of the sacrificial, or their souls underneath the altar. Now in Leviticus chapter 9, I'll write it down. In Leviticus 9 and Exodus, I believe it's 29. Yes. In Exodus 29, we see in both of these accounts that when the animals were killed, their blood was poured out at the base of the altar. I apologize for my handwriting. But we see an example in Leviticus 9 and in Exodus 29 that when these animals that were offered up as guilt offerings, when the priests were consecrated, that after the blood had been, remember they took Aaron and his sons, they put blood on each of his earlobes, they put it on his thumbs and on the big toes of his feet, and then the rest of the blood was poured out at the base of the altar. Now let's think about that. Think about that idea of that sacrificial blood poured out on the altar, and the idea of the souls of those who had been killed, let's just say killed, martyred for Christ, were poured out at the base of the altar. So both of these were sacrificial. They had sacrificed their bodies. They had sacrificed their living human bodies for the sake of Christ, and their souls were at that base of the altar, and they were crying out to God. And interesting. I mean, that idea is so. The imagery of it is just so powerful. The fact that animal's blood was poured out at the base of the altar, and now the souls of those who had been crucified, sacrificed for the sake of Christ, were at the base of the altar, and they were crying out. Remember, where else have we heard that the blood of someone is cried out to the Lord? Yeah. Your brother's blood cries out to me. What did it cry out to me? What did it cry out? Avenge me. You know, where is justice in this? What's going to happen here? Is my brother going to be allowed to be allowed to walk around completely free? Well, we see that's not the case, is it? God did punish him. He didn't strike him dead, but he punished him. He put a mark, what he called a mark, so that everyone would know who he was and what he did. Okay. All right. So if you go to that, you can go to Leviticus 9, Exodus 29. You can see that. But they had been sacrificed, and their blood had been poured out. Now, what do these souls at the base of this altar, and underneath the altar, what do they cry out to God? Let somebody read it for me. What does it say? In verse 10. Chapter 6 and verse 10. So who's got that, read it for me.
They cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth?
Okay. So a legitimate question, right? These souls cry out and they say, how long? And look who do they cry out to vengeance for? They cry out to the Lord. How long? And how do they describe the Lord? What? Holy and true. All right? So we have, and they are crying out to God. They're not crying out to Jesus. They're crying out to God. And they describe him as holy and true. The idea of true meaning the most pure sense of truth, right? It is God is truth personified. He cannot lie. He does not lead people to lie. He will not abide lies. As a matter of fact, if you look, what are some of the people that are described as being destined for a lake of fire? Liars. God can't stand liars. He doesn't want us to lie. It's to him a lie is as bad as let's be honest. If you're a liar, you're as bad as a murderer, aren't you? Because by your lie, by people's lies, people have been lost for eternity, haven't they? So is a liar equal to a murderer? It can be, absolutely. Okay, he's serious about liars. But God is not a liar. He cannot lie. He will not lie. He cannot abide a lie. As a matter of fact, Satan is considered the father of lies. He was from the very beginning. And look how he says he's a liar and a murderer from the beginning. All right, so we know that God is the only one who is holy and is true in the sense that only God can be. All right, so they're crying out to him, and it's interesting because the way they say this, because they know that the person they're crying out to is holy. So we know that his vengeance is going to be righteous and just, and it's true because he sees through everything. All right, you can't pull the wool over God's eyes. So as these people, as their judgment is going to come from a God who is both righteous and is true. Can't fool him. He knows everything, and his judgment will be just. Okay. All right. So now they crying out to God. They call him what he truly is. But what is their question? What is the question that they ask? How long? How long what? How long? Until well, read it. How long what? How long until, what does it say? I mean, just read the verse.
The same one Charlie read?
Yeah, verse 10.
And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood?
Okay, there we go. How long is it going to be until you what? Avenge our blood. And what else? Everybody sounds very timid about this. It's like, it says, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Now, This is something that I think would be a good idea for us to remember. Based on the fact that they know that the God that they cry out to is holy and true, I don't believe what they're asking for is, Lord, hurry up and avenge us. Hurry up and visit vengeance on those people who did these things to us. Because if you look in the very next verse, he makes a statement that it kind of, I think, contradicts that idea that they are just simply thirsting for vengeance. That's not what they're looking for. Look at what it says. How long is it going to be before you avenge our blood on those who walk on the earth? But look at the very next thing. Essentially what they're really asking is, how long is it going to be before we are vindicated and we're allowed to leave this place? How long are we going to be in this Hadean realm? Because remember, at this point, they're not in heaven. They're not at peace with God forever. They're like every other soul of every other living person who has ever died. They are not in heaven, and that's something you still have to deal with even with Christians. They seem to think, well, he's gone on to heaven. No, he hasn't. It's easier than to say, well, he's gone on to the Hadean realm. It's not quite as big of a comfort to people who've lost a loved one, is it? It's easier to say, well, he's gone on to heaven. He's in the arms of Jesus, so forth and so on. But that's not really what happens. All right? Right now, all these souls are not in heaven. And what they're asking for is, how long is it going to be before we leave this place and go to be with you? That's what they want. They know that God is going to avenge. And they know that it is going to be a just vengeance. He's going to give justice to these people who shed their blood on this earth. What they're really asking then is, how long? How long are we going to be in this place? We don't want to be here. Okay? As beautiful as it is and as comforted as we are in Abraham's bosom, this is not where we want to spend our time. What we do is we want to go to be where you are. I want to be in heaven with you. How long until this period of my existence is done and I'm given that crown of life and I'm given that home for eternity? Because look at what he says very next in verse 11. Read verse 11 for me. Somebody read verse 11.
To them that they should rest yet for a little season until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled.
Okay, so again, this cannot be talking about the second coming of Christ, can it? Because they said you're going to have to rest even a little longer until the number of your brethren that is going to complete this aspect is going to be happening. There's still things yet to come. There are going to be people who still have yet to be martyred. So it's sad to think that even after this period of conflict and this period of persecution, there are still yet others that will be martyred. Their brethren in Christ, their family members, other Christians, the Christians they don't even know. There are still people who are going to be martyred yet for Christ. But he does say that. So what's going to be given to them as a symbol? White robe. We've seen this before, right? It's an emblem of innocence. They've been found innocent of. And this is an interesting. And I never thought about it like this. And it wasn't until after I started studying I kind of brought this idea that it was innocence. Not only are they innocent in the fact that their sins were washed away and that they become New Testament Christians, then they die as Christians, but also, if you remember, many of these people were put to death because of false accusations. They've been judged innocent of the crimes for which they were put to death. This man is an atheist. He doesn't believe in many gods. This man is an idolater because he will not worship the emperor god, the cult of the emperor. He will not worship Zeus. He will not worship the gods that we worship. Therefore, they consider him to be a pagan. So many of these people were put to death because of false accusation. That white robe designates them as innocent of the charges that they were killed for. So not only was it a symbol of innocence, it was a symbol of purity. They had kept themselves holy and unspotted from the world. All right, we're told to do that in Scripture, right? In Acts. And then also a symbol of victory. They overcame the things that were thrown their way. All of the things that were put in their path, they overcame all of those obstacles and all of those accusations and all of that persecution. They overcame all of it. So it's a symbol really of innocence, it's a symbol of purity, and it's a symbol of victory. And it was given to them, but it was also told them that they would have to rest a little while longer, until all of their brethren who were going to be killed in the same way, until that number was completed. So we know that there's going to be still yet another period of persecution, isn't there? All right, now I'm going to drop a little history here because it helps us to understand a little bit more. What was this time of persecution? Who were these people that were yet to be killed? Let's look at this for just a couple minutes. Now, the idea of resting for a little while and these people that were going to be persecuted and martyred a little bit further on, it really depends on which group of martyrs that these people, these souls that were at the base of this altar, depends on which group this is. Because remember, there were several persecutions. And there were people who were killed in each of these persecutions. So a lot of it has to do on what group of martyrs this is. Now, again, this is history. Were these martyrs martyred before the reign of Diocletian, which was in 303 AD? If this is the case, then these martyrs would not be avenged until the acceptance of Christianity under Constantine in 325. Now, if these were martyrs who were martyred under Diocletian, who actually died under his reign in 303, from 303 on, then their fellow servants, these fellow servants and brethren that were going to be martyred, would actually be martyred under papal Rome. Okay? So you have two differing viewpoints. I personally, based on what I've read, I personally look at the first more than the second. At the end of the day, it makes absolutely no difference to our salvation. It could be the first, it could be the second, and it won't make any difference. There's nothing in this verse that says if you don't believe this is the persecution, then I'm sorry, you're in sin and you're lost. No, that's not the case. Remember, this was written to the Christians then. Christians then would have understood. They understood. It was told them in their worship assembly. The one who could prophesy could understand and could explain. They understood and could explain it. So they understood it, even if we don't completely get the entire picture because we weren't there at the time. All right? But I thought this was interesting because it talks about papal Rome, and we will see that this papal Rome, and the papal Rome, of course, the papacy simply means that of the Pope. This is where you get a lot of people that go, I'm done. You know, I don't think you should speak evil of another religious group, and this is wrong. Listen, we're looking at history. This is history, and it's Bible history. So the idea of the papal Rome, there was certainly faithful Christians who were martyred. But the promise still remained. Those who had died in Christ were in a place of comfort. They were in a place that they no longer had to endure the things that they had to endure. They were given a figurative white robe to signify their overcoming the things that happened to them, and they were at peace. But they still had a question for God. How long is it going to be? How long? How long? How long? Not that they were clamoring for vengeance, because that kind of throws into contrast what Jesus said about paradise, right? In paradise, we're not after blood. We're not thirsting for the blood of someone else. This is more of a question about how long will we be here? How much longer until this is no longer where we are, but up there is where we are. We want to be with you. And see, that's the thing a lot of people have. Well, they were already in heaven. No, they weren't already in heaven. That's just simply where John was receiving his vision. That's it. There was not actually an altar in the throne room. There weren't actually souls under the altar in the throne room. This was simply where he received his vision. Much in the same way, if I'm watching television at home, say I was watching the State of the Union address, okay? I know that that's not actually happening in that little box. There's not a big group of people that are crowded into my little television set acting out this scenario that's happening in Washington, D.C. But I'm watching it at home. It must be happening. No, it's not. I liken it very much to that. John is watching a spiritual television set. He's seeing all of these things, but he is still in the throne room of God seeing these things that are going to happen. They've happened in the past, they're going to happen in the future, and so forth and so on. Okay? Any questions about this? Because this is one where a lot of people have serious, again, we're getting into some real figurative language, and this is where a lot of people, that's where the train proverbially goes off the rails for a lot of folks.
That cleared up a lot when if they're not praying for justice on these people, but they can't enter heaven until judgment is made.
Yeah,
And I've
exactly.
never put it
Yeah.
that way before, never seen it that way.
it's not that where they are is unpleasant, but they know it's not as good as it's going to be. How long until vengeance is done so that I can go and be where you are? They long to be with the Lamb. They long to be with the Redeemer. They long to be with God. And we think about it in the same way. I can't wait until I go to be with God, but I know that I might not get there before, I may get there before, I'm not going to get there before this world is done. I'm just not going to. It's not given for us to do that.
Is John seeing real souls or just?
Well, it's a vision, so we have to take that for what it is. Did he actually see a white robe? Is he actually going to see? Because if you look, and sometimes the translation says, and I saw as it were. Okay? So it's much in the same way. Have you ever had a dream and you wake up and you can talk about what happened in the dream, but if we really think about it, did I actually see that particular thing, or was that my mind telling me what was going on? Because I've had dreams where I wake up and I say, my wife did this, and if I really stop and think about it, I didn't see my wife in that dream at all. I did not see her face, but my mind said that the person who was talking to me or who did this thing, that was my wife, or that was my daughter, or that was whoever it might be. So I hesitate to answer that John saw da-da-da-da. Yeah, John saw real souls, and that's all it can. But it says that he saw an altar, and under it were the souls of those who had been martyred for the sake of Christ. They had remained faithful. And I saw as it were this, and I saw as it were this. The only thing we can say is whatever it was he actually saw, it was represented by what is described in the Scriptures. And he's going to see some things you think there's no way he could have actually seen. I like it. Have you ever read the book of Ezekiel and the images that they say he saw? Some of those things are they're so strange. I don't know how they could be physically represented. For example, the living creatures, the 4 living creatures that represented the earthly dominion. The way they're described, I don't know how you would put that on paper. I don't know how you would draw that. I certainly don't have the talent. Imagine somebody maybe does. But the way they're described, I'm trying to think of how that would look. But at the end of the day, he's describing as best as he can with earthly language the things that he saw. And these were what's considered cherubim. There are things that exist, but we don't understand. It's hard for us to understand them. He saw something. It was given him to see something. Now, did he actually see a physical thing? Well, it couldn't have been physical. We know that it couldn't be physical. But he's in a spiritual realm. But it was given for him to see things that describe. There's a lot of schools of thought, and I'm not going to take a stand on any of them because I don't have to. There's no reason for me to. Some people said, were these images just given into John's mind? Was he physically transported to the heavens? I don't know how he could be transported to the heavens and retain his physical body. Even Jesus had to shed his earthly body. So how could he see these physical things? I believe that John, personally, I think John remained where he was. Either his spirit or something that helped him to understand was taken to this place, and these images were given for him to understand and then write down. He described them with pretty descriptive language. Could be. I don't put anything past God. God can do pretty much anything he wanted to. Yeah. So anyway, here's where we are. Okay, so now we've had the 5th seal opened. And this 5th seal shows the souls of those who had been martyred and what they're wanting. How long, O Lord, before our time in this place is over, that judgment is made and we can leave this place. So let's continue on real quick. All right. The 6th seal in verses 12 and 13. Who wants to read that for me?
Okay, what did you say?
Verse 12 and 13.
Okay. I looked when he opened the 6th seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black, a sackcloth of air, and the moon became like blood. And okay, you said read what?
12 and 13.
12 and 13. and the stars of heaven fell on the earth as fig trees dropped its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind. Keep on reading.
That's 12 and 13.
Oh,
All right, so we're good.
okay.
All right, so what do we have here in 12 and 13? We have yet another seal that's been opened, yet another portion of that scroll is rolled out for John to see and for the things that are on it to be shown to him so that he can write down exactly what's happening. All right, so now what's the first thing that we see? What's the first thing that happens after this seal has been opened? There's an earthquake. Now, is there an actual earthquake? Okay, let's think about this because it goes a little bit further. It says first there's earthquake, and then there's what? The sun, what? Sun, it's like the sun's been blotted out. What happens to the moon? The stars fell. The moon becomes as blood. The stars fall to the earth. All right, so let's think about this for just a couple of moments. Every time we find in Scripture the idea of an earthquake, it's speaking of an event of immense magnitude. All right, when we think about it, in the ancient world, for an earthquake, especially for the pagans, what did they think? The gods are rocking the world. There's warfare going on. I mean, there's all kinds of explanations for an earthquake. But if you think about it, in a part of time when building standards weren't always the greatest, when it was simply, hey, you need a building, throw something up. I mean, it doesn't matter what it looks like, it doesn't matter how well it's built, just put a structure up. What likely did an earthquake do to a town or a city or a village where the building standards weren't quite up to par maybe for today? Okay, an earthquake was literally an earth-shattering event. Major disturbance, big upheaval. A lot of times it was accompanied by a volcano that might be erupting, especially in that part of the world. Okay, there's all kinds of Mount Vesuvius. Then you have Mount Etna. You have all of these that are in that area that when they erupted, it threw everything into upheaval. I mean, it really just destroyed everything. It's like any natural disaster, especially in the ancient world, was a cause for major, major concern. People were scared. It did a lot of destruction. So God uses this idea of an earthquake to show something that is a major upheaval in the time frame in which it's supposed to happen. Okay. Now, some people claim that this earthquake and the sun and the moon and the stars is referring to the second coming of Jesus, and of course, we realize that it can't be because there are things that are going to happen after this. There are still things that are going to occur, and we know that after the second coming of Christ, there can't be anything that's going to occur on this earth, right? Because this earth is going to be gone. Okay, so this can't refer to the second coming of Jesus Christ, because there's still a lot more to go in this revelation to John. So it can't be the second coming. So what do we think about? For one thing, it's followed by a period when the multitude of the redeemed will be sealed for forever and forevermore. And we're going to see where there's going to be an opening of the seventh seal when the trumpets are going to be sounded, signifying even more events. Okay, so we can discard this idea that this is talking about the second coming. But remember, the idea of the day of the Lord refers to a great many events that have happened throughout history. All right, the flood, the coming of the flood was a day of the Lord. All right, the day of Pentecost was a day of the Lord. The crucifixion of Christ was a day of the Lord. So all of this has to do with simply the idea, the concept that there's going to be a tremendous amount of upheaval that's going to occur. So let's think about this. We know that millennialism is false. So this just simply signifies another major event. If you want to write this down, this is Joel chapter 2 at verse 10. We don't necessarily read. I'm going to paraphrase these for everybody's sake and try to get through some of this. Joel chapter 2 and verse 10. Isaiah 13 verses 9 and 10. And then Jeremiah 4 and verse 24. And I'm just going to give you the highlights of these. Because we think about these things, this has been used before in other figurative language. We find this in Joel. Joel says in chapter 2 and verse 10, the sun and the moon are darkened and the stars withdraw their shining. Isaiah 13 verses 9 and 10, behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation and to destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of the heaven and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed its light. Jeremiah 4:24, I looked on the mountains, and behold, they were quaking, and the hills, all the hills moved to and fro. Now, here's the thing. When it says these, there's no record that these things physically happened, that the sun didn't shine or that the moon, but it's talking about something, a great disturbance is going to come upon the land. All right? I like the one in Isaiah. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation and to destroy its sinners from it. Now, if you go back and you start looking at these things, these are situations in which God is going to cause things to happen. Many times it's the idea of punishing the wrongdoer. Sometimes it's a matter of punishing his own people. All right? So, this is just, he's letting them know that there's something that's going to happen that's going to shake the foundations of the world that they knew, that they understood. All right? So in verse 14, somebody read verse 14 for me.
Then the sky receded as a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place.
Okay. So we have things that, let's be honest, if you get up in the morning, can you reasonably expect the sky to be there? Yeah. If you go to, I'm trying to think of something good. If you go to Mount McKinley, can you reasonably expect, if you saw it last year, if you went back to be there again this year, Mount McKinley? Yeah. There's a lot of big mountains. You go in certain areas where there are a lot of big major mountains. Is it reasonable to expect that the island of Cuba is still in its place? Hasn't moved. So we think about these things. These are institutions. These are physical monuments, physical things that you can reasonably expect will never go away. They're just always going to be there because they've always been there. All right, it's something reasonable. So what does God do? What is God saying here then? He said there's going to be major calamity, there's going to be major disruption, and things that you thought were going to be in place forever are no longer going to be there. A mountain is going to be pulled up, the island is going to be pulled up, the sky is going to be rolled back. So, now we think about a major institution. Thought to be unending, pulled from its place. What is it? Anybody else? It would be the Roman Empire, but the Roman Empire in its current form. If you remember, the Roman Empire had been in place for hundreds of years. Okay? It had its reach over a quarter of the known modern world. It was thought that the Roman Empire would stand forever because of its ability to maintain its property, to take taxes. Its army was the greatest fighting force that the world had ever known to this point. So what's going to happen? God is going to take the Roman Empire and He's going to shake it like the figs coming off the tree, like the stars falling. He's going to shake it, and there's going to be major changes in the Roman Empire. And they're going to be due to God's efforts in that part. He is going to be responsible for that because only God could pull up a mountain. Isn't that right? We can't do that. Only God could roll back the sky. We couldn't do that. Only God could cause the things to happen. I don't care what we did. I don't care what science fiction movie you watch. We could never make the sun not to shine. We just can't. We cannot bring the stars down from the sky. We just don't have that power. But God does. If God wanted all the stars in the universe to disappear, He said the word and it's gone. Okay, so we're looking at something, a major monumental event. It's something that only God could cause to happen. So let's go a little bit further with it in the time that we've got left. All right, so the Roman Empire's government, thought to be unconquerable, there are going to be radical changes to the Roman Empire. In verse 15, somebody read verse 15 for me.
And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, commanders, mighty men, every slave, every free man, hid themselves in caves, in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us, hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand?
Okay. This sounds like a cataclysmic event, doesn't it? It sounds like catastrophe. Here's the thing: is it's really not. It's as a matter of fact, God is going to cause something to happen for good that would have been unthinkable not 10 years before this. All right. Number one, first let's look at who is going to be affected. There's really not anybody left out of this, is there? Noblemen, kings, everything, all the way down to slaves. So everybody in the Roman Empire is going to be affected by these things that are going to happen. No group of people is going to be excluded. They're all going to see the consequences of this great major event. Everybody is going to have. And not only that, they're going to be fearful because of the changes that are coming, and they're going to hide their face even from the Lamb. So let's think about this. Oftentimes when we look at major upheaval, there may be one group of people that's affected over another group of people. We were talking about that at dinner tonight. There are certain people that no matter what happens, they seem to be unaffected because of they have wealth or they have power. Okay, so they're insulated. If there's hard economic times, a lot of people, they don't have to worry about it. They still have plenty of money. They can afford whatever it is they need, and in some cases, they're still incredibly wealthy, even if hard times come. Then you have other occasions, especially in the Roman Empire, and this is something we need to remember, that most of the time when something was going on, it was people in positions of power that were in most danger, especially in the changing of an emperor. Because what happens is you have an emperor, and he has people who are loyal to him, and then when he is deposed or taken out by force, and another emperor is put in, he remembers all of these people who supported his predecessor, and they were some of the first people to be exiled, to be executed, to have all of their property taken, all of these things. But here it says that this is going to be an event that's going to affect virtually everybody. Everybody's going to see this happen. And there are going to be those who are going to fear what's going to happen. They're going to run. They're going to hide themselves, much in the same way that we see in Isaiah, where it said that these people would run. They would run to the hills. They would be scared of what was going to happen. They would beg for the mountains to fall in on top of them because they were fearful about what's going to happen to them. All right, so let's think about this. I'm going to give you this timeline, and we can see this thing that's going to happen and the effect that it's going to have, this ripple effect throughout the empire. Let's look. All right. The changes that he's talking about here must have happened during the time of Constantine. Now, a lot of people want to call Constantine the first Christian emperor. He was not really a Christian emperor, but he was very much predisposed to Christianity. He was considered the patron guardian of Christianity. All right. In 308 AD, the empire was divided up among 6 emperors. And we talked about this. We talked about all the upheaval, the civil war, because you have 6 men all vying for power over this massive empire. They would put together private armies. They would wage civil war against each other. And this is where we see what was happening in the 4th and 5th seal. All right, continuing on. By 313, so only 5 years later, there were 2. And these 2 emperors were Constantine and Licinius. The paganistic Licinius was defeated in 332 AD, and Constantine became the sole emperor of Rome. Now, since Constantine was favorable to Christianity, the war really, at this case, between Constantine and Licinius was really between Christianity and paganism. So you had these 2 factions that were going on, and they were battling for power. If Licinius had won out, now we know that God had a hand in this, so he was never going to win. But had he gained power and he had been the emperor of the known Roman world, the Christians still would have been driven into hiding because he was very much a pagan. He believed in worship of the gods, even to the point of heaping up worship for himself. All right? But God saw to it that the person that needed to win this war between Christianity and paganism won the war. All right? He was sole emperor of the Roman world. So since Constantine was favorable to Christianity, this war was really between Christianity and paganism. Now in 313 AD, the Edict of Milan, the privilege was granted for everyone to worship as he saw fit, and no one was prevented from practicing Christianity. So now here we've got a situation where not 10 years before, if you worshiped Jesus Christ, if you were a Christian, your property could have been seized, you could have been imprisoned, you could have been exiled. In many cases, you weren't allowed to work. You weren't allowed to go wherever you wanted to go. You couldn't move. You were very much a prisoner in the Roman Empire. And there was a great deal of issues that go along with it. Many of these people, these souls that were seen at the base of that altar, were these who died under the practices of these pagan Roman empires. Now, guess what? You're free to practice Christianity. As a matter of fact, it's encouraged that you practice Christianity. The Roman emperors saw a good thing when they knew a good thing when they saw it. They saw that the Christians, they said these Christians, they're fantastic citizens. They don't rock the boat. They take care of one another. So guess what? All these people that are needful, they're not reliant on the Roman government for what they need. The Christians take care of themselves. They keep to themselves. They work with their hands. They're not after political power. They simply want to be able to practice. And they're not harming anybody by their practices. We may find them a little strange. The idea that they worship one God, that's a little weird, but that's okay. That's all right. In fact, they began to have a great deal of influence on the Roman government itself because they saw what good people the Christians actually were. And they didn't have any problems. You think about it. Can you imagine if the situation had been different in the time of Christ when Christ was being put on trial? It says that the Jews went to the ruling authorities and argued for his crucifixion. They said that Jesus would have walked free if the Christians had been the ones exercising the influence. We don't want him to die. Leave him alone. He hadn't done anything. He said some ugly things about him, but that's okay. Let him go. We're not after his blood. So you see the difference between Christians as citizens and a lot of the other people that they had as citizens. So for the first time, people were able to practice Christianity openly without any kind of reprisal. It was fully, the privileges were fully granted. In 321, he decreed that Sunday should be a day of rest from businesses and labor in Roman towns. And in 326, he began building Constantinople, and this was the new capital of the Roman Empire. He moved the capital there, but then, of course, we see where Constantinople and Rome began to vie against one another for what's called the Holy Roman Empire, and Rome eventually won out. Constantinople became the Greek Orthodox, Rome became the Roman Catholic Church, and of course, at this time, the church was really deep into apostasy anyway, so that's a study for another time. But you see, Constantine genuinely appreciated Christianity, even if he was not a practicing New Testament Christian himself. But we say, well, how could it be a Christian empire if the man in charge wasn't? Well, listen, what did we see from Nebuchadnezzar? Daniel and his three friends. He was not a practicing Jew. He never underwent what was necessary to be a Jew. However, he acknowledged that the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the God of Daniel, is God. He recognized that, and he made a law. Whoever says anything against this God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he'll be killed. His family will be killed. All of his stuff will be heaped up as a pile on top of them. Their graves, they will be buried underneath all of their stuff. He wasn't. All he simply did was acknowledge who God was, and that's really all that Constantine is doing here. It's not a Christian empire, but what Constantine did was allow Christians for the first time in a long time to be able to breathe a sigh of relief and to be able to practice their faith openly and without harm coming to them. And this is what it's talking about when it says that these saints are going to breathe a sigh of relief for the first time. They're going to be free to practice their Christianity. All right, I'm going to be done there. Anybody got any questions about the fifth and the sixth seal? Next week, Lord willing, we'll continue on, chapter 6, and we'll get a little bit further on. Anybody got anything they want to add?